Hi, today we are in week 4 of self-quarantine. You might not be watching this during week 4 of self-quarantine, but that's what's happening. So I realized that I need to keep going in this novel that we're trying to read together, or else you're going to see my natural hair color of gray. I have my special coffee mug that I know you've missed seeing very much with me, and a super scary t-shirt because my 4th period class is terrified of this shirt. And if I showed you the whole thing, you might be afraid of it too. So I'm just going to tell you that I'm wearing it for 4th period. Make sure that they're following along here. I want to make sure that they're engaged in distance learning. Chapter 4. There was a moment's silence. A silence of dismay and bewilderment. Then the judge's small, clear voice took up the thread once more. We will now proceed to the next stage of our inquiry. First, however, I will just add my own credentials to the list. He took a letter from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. This purports to be from an old friend of mine, Lady Constance Colmington. I have not seen her for some years. She went to the East. It is exactly the kind of vague, incoherent letter she would write, urging me to join her here and referring to her host and hostess in the vaguest of terms. Vague means like you can't quite follow, you don't understand, unclear. The same technique you will observe. I only mention it because it agrees with the other evidence, from all of which emerges one interesting point. Whoever it was who enticed us here, that person knows or has taken the trouble to find out a good deal about us all. He, whoever he may be, is aware of my friendship for Lady Constance and is familiar with her epistolary style, the way that she writes letters. He knows something about Dr. Armstrong's colleagues and their present whereabouts. He knows the nickname of Mr. Marston's friend and the kind of telegrams he sends. He knows exactly where Miss Brent was 2 years ago for her holiday and the kind of people she met there. He knows all about General MacArthur's old cronies. Cronies means friends. He paused, then he said, He knows, you see, a good deal, and out of his knowledge concerning us, he has made certain definite accusations. So if you can imagine yourself there and think about how strange that would be for somebody to know so much about you, invite you to this place, and then they're not there at all, and then this gramophone record comes projecting through the wall, accusing you of a crime, and they clearly have done some research on who you are as a person. So the guests have to be feeling very uneasy at this point. He knows, you see, a good deal, and out of this knowledge concerning us, he has made certain definite accusations. Immediately, a babble broke out. General MacArthur shouted, A pack of darn lies! Slander! Vera cried out, It's iniquitous! Her breath came fast. Wicked! Roger said hoarsely, A lie! A wicked lie! We never did! Neither of us! Anthony Marston growled, I don't know what the darn fool was getting at! The upraised hand of Mr. Justice Wargrave calmed the tumult. He said, picking his words with care, I wish to say this. Our unknown friend accuses me of the murder of one Edward Seaton. I remember Seaton perfectly well. He came up before me for trial in June of the year 1930. He was charged with the murder of an elderly woman. He was very ably defended and made a good impression on the jury in the witness box. Nevertheless, on the evidence, he was certainly guilty. I summed up accordingly, and the jury brought in a verdict of guilty. In passing sentence of death, I concurred with the verdict. An appeal was lodged on the grounds of misdirection. The appeal was rejected, and the man was duly executed. I wish to say before you all that my conscience is perfectly clear on the matter. I did my duty and nothing more. I passed sentence on a rightly convicted murderer. So for those of you that like to follow true crime cases, I'm sure you can think of famous cases, I know I can, where somebody was clearly guilty. No doubt about it. And they had an amazing attorney who helped them walk free. And Justice Wargrave is saying this is the case with Edward Seaton. He was definitely a guilty man, but he had an attorney that was going to help set him free. And he had a way with the jurors of convincing them. And as the judge in the case, I made it a point to make sure that at the end, when I gave my summary, the jurors agreed with me that he actually was in fact guilty. Armstrong was remembering now The Seton case. The verdict had come as a great surprise. He had met Matthews K.C., that would be like one of the attorneys, on one of the days of the trial at a restaurant. Matthews had been confident, not a doubt of the verdict, acquittal practically certain. And then afterwards, he had heard comments. Judge was dead against him. Turned the jury right around and they brought him in guilty. Quite legal, though. Old Wargrave knew his law. It was almost as though he had a private down on the fellow, like there was some reason he did that the guy was going to be set free. And for some reason, Justice Wargrave decided that for a personal reason, he was going to make sure that this guy did time. And not only did he do time, he was executed. All these memories rushed through the doctor's mind. Before he could consider the wisdom of the question, he had asked impulsively, "Did you know Seton at all? I mean, previous to the case," wondering, did you have a private reason for not liking this guy? The hooded reptilian eyes met his. In a clear, cold voice, the judge said, "I knew nothing of Seton previous to the case." Armstrong said to himself, "The fellow's lying. I know he's lying." Vera Claythorne spoke in a trembling voice. She said, "I'd like to tell you about that child, Cyril Hamilton. I was nursery governess to him," which means nanny. "He was forbidden to swim out far. One day when my attention was distracted, he started off. I swam after him. I couldn't get there in time. It was awful. But it wasn't my fault. At the inquest, the coroner exonerated me, and his mother, she was so kind. If even she didn't blame me, why should this awful thing be said? It's not fair. Not fair." She broke down, weeping bitterly. General MacArthur patted her shoulder. He said, There, my dear, of course it's not true. Fellow's a madman. A madman. Got a bee in his bonnet. Got a hold of the wrong end of the stick all around." He stood erect, squaring his shoulders. He barked out, "Best really to leave this sort of thing unanswered. However, I feel I ought to say, no truth. No truth whatsoever in what he said about young Arthur Richmond. Richmond was one of my officers. I sent him on a mission, a reconnaissance. He was killed. Natural course of events in wartime. I wish to say I resent every much the slur on my wife. Best woman in the world, absolutely, Caesar's wife." I'm not talking about Caesar in my class. What he's saying, remember, he was guilty of, or at least according to the gramophone, that he was accused of sending this man out on a mission that he knew he wouldn't survive because this man was having an affair with his wife. And General MacArthur is saying, absolutely not true. General MacArthur sat down. His shaking hand pulled at his mustache. The effort to speak had cost him a good deal. Lombard spoke. His eyes were amused. He said, "About those natives." Marston said, "What about them?" Philip Lombard grinned. "Story's quite true. I left him. Matter of self-preservation. We were lost in the bush. I and a couple of other fellows took what food there was and cleared out." General MacArthur said sternly, "You abandoned your men, left them to starve?" Lombard said, "Not quite the act of a hero, I'm afraid, but self-preservation's a man's first duty, and natives don't mind dying, you know? They don't feel about it as Europeans do." So he's actually admitting, yeah, they accused me of that, and that's what I did, but this is why. Vera lifted her face from her hand. She said, staring at him, "You left them? To die?" Lombard answered, "I left him to die." His amused eyes looked into her horrified ones. Anthony Marston said in a slow, puzzled voice, "I've just been thinking. John and Lucy Combs? Must have been a couple of kids I ran over near Cambridge. Beastly bad luck." Remember, Anthony Marston's the young guy with the super fancy car, so he's saying, yeah, I ran over some kids. Mr. Justice Wargrave said acidly, "For them or for you?" Anthony said, "Well, I was thinking for me, but of course you're right, sir. It was darn bad luck on them. Of course it was pure accident. They rushed out of some cottage or other. I had my license taken away for a year. Beastly nuisance." Dr. Armstrong said warmly, "Speeding's all wrong, all wrong. Young men like you are a danger to the community." Anthony shrugged his shoulders. He said, "Speeds come to stay. English roads are hopeless, of course. Can't get up a decent pace on them." He looked around vaguely for his glass, picked it up off a table, and went over to the side table and helped himself to another whiskey and soda. He said over his shoulder, "Well, anyway, it wasn't my fault. Just an accident." Throughout this story, they're going to use this word sideboard or side table. When you hear sideboard, they're talking about this piece of furniture that you see behind me. this table. It's called a sideboard. And usually people have it in their dining room, and they might put like a buffet if you were having a lot of people over to eat dinner with you on top of a sideboard. That's what they do in the novel. So anytime you hear sideboard, just remember it's this piece of furniture that's behind me that usually ends up in a dining room. Nowadays we just kind of, at my house, we use it for decoration. But you could easily put plates if you had nice plates and silverware, stuff like that inside it. The manservant, Rogers, had been moistening his lips and twisting his hands. He said now in a low, deferential voice, "I might say a word, sir." Lombard said, "Go ahead, Rogers." Rogers cleared his throat and passed his tongue once more over his dry lips. "There was a mention, sir, of me and Mrs. Rogers and of Miss Brady. There isn't a word of truth in it, sir. My wife and I were with Miss Brady till she died. She was always in poor health, sir, always from the time we came to her. There was a storm, sir, that night. The night she was taken bad. The telephone was out of order. We couldn't get to the doctor. I went for him, sir, on foot, but he got there too late. We'd done everything possible for her, sir. Devoted to her we were. Anyone will tell you the same. There's never a word said against us, not a word." So you can imagine Mr. Rogers and his wife both seem like very nice, quiet, skittish people. And he's saying, we were taking care of this older lady. It was snowing really badly. She needed some medical attention. There was nothing that we could do. We tried everything, but there was nothing that we could do to help her, and she died. Lombard looked thoughtfully at the man's twitching face, his dry lips, the fright in his eyes. He remembered the crash of the falling coffee tray. He thought, but did not say. "Oh, yeah." Bloor spoke in his hearty, bullying official manner. He said, "But you came into a little something after her death, though, hey? Like you inherited some money." Rogers drew himself up. He said stiffly, "Miss Brady left us a legacy in recognition of our faithful services, and why not, I'd like to know." Lombard said, "What about yourself, Mr. Bloor?" "What about me?" "Your name was included in the list." Bloor went purple. "Landor, you mean?" "That was the bank robbery. London and Commercial, that's the name of the bank." Mr. Justice Wargrave stirred. He said, "I remember. It didn't come before me, like this case didn't come to my courtroom. But I remember the case. Landor was convicted on your evidence. You were the police officer in charge of the case." Bloor said, "I was. Landor got penal servitude for life and died in Dartmoor a year later. He was a delicate man." Bloor said, "He was a crook. It was he who knocked out the night watchman. The case was quite clear against him." Wargrave said slowly, "You are complimented, I think, on your able handling of the case." Bloor said sulkily, "I got my promotion." He added in a thick voice, "I was only doing my duty." Lombard laughed. A sudden, ringing laugh, he said, "What a duty-loving, law-abiding lot we all seem to be. Myself excepted. What about you, Doctor, and your little professional mistake? A legal operation, was it?" Emily Brent glanced at him in sharp distaste and drew herself away a little. Dr. Armstrong, very much master of himself, shook his head good-humoredly. "I'm at a loss to understand the matter," he said. "The name meant nothing to me when it was spoken. Was it Cleese? Close? I really can't remember having a patient of that name, or being connected with the death in any way. The thing's a complete mystery to me. Of course, it's a long time ago. It might possibly be one of the operations in the hospital. They come too late, so many of those people. Then when the patient dies, they always consider it the surgeon's fault." He sighed, shaking his head. He thought, "Drunk. That's what it was, drunk. And I operated. Nerves all to pieces, hands shaking. I killed her, all right. Poor devil. Elderly woman. Simple job if I'd been sober. Lucky for me there's loyalty in our profession. The sister, meaning the nurse, knew, of course, but she held her tongue. She didn't say anything. God, it gave me a shock. Pulled me up. But who could have known about it after all these years?" So notice that after this accusation, and all of the characters are explaining their role in the accusation, some of the characters are flat out denying anything, like Dr. Armstrong, just saying nothing. But through his thoughts, we know he actually did admit that he was drunk, and because of that, he killed somebody while he was operating. Anthony Marston, on the other hand, the young guy with the sports car, just says, yep, I did it. I ran over 2 kids. John and Lucy Combs, I did that. And then we have people like Vera who say, I was the subject of a coroner's inquest, but I did nothing. I tried to save that kid. We have General MacArthur who says, I was in the middle of a war. I sent a man out on a mission. The man died. That is not my fault. It happens in war. It's a tragedy. So it's interesting to see how the different characters responded to the accusation, and keep in mind that each of those is separated with a Roman numeral. So if you were asked questions about this, you could easily go back and see which character did what according to the separation. There was a silence in the room. Everybody was looking overtly or openly at Emily Brent. It was a minute or two before she became aware of the expectation. Her eyebrows rose on the narrow forehead. She said, "Are you waiting for me to say something?" "I have nothing to say." The judge said, "Nothing, Miss Brent, nothing." Her lips closed tightly. The judge stroked his face. He said mildly, "You reserve your defense." Miss Brent said coldly, "There is no question of defense. I've always acted in accordance with the dictates of my conscience. I have nothing with which to reproach myself." There was an unsatisfied feeling in the air, but Emily Brent was not one to be swayed by public opinion. She sat unyielding. The judge cleared his throat once or twice. Then he said, "Our inquiry rests there. Now, Rogers, who else is there on the island besides ourselves and you and your wife?" "Nobody, sir, nobody at all." "You're sure of that?" "Quite sure, sir." Wargrave said, "I am not yet clear as to the purpose of our unknown host in getting us to assemble here. But in my opinion, this person, whoever he may be, is not sane in the accepted sense of the word. He may be dangerous. In my opinion, it would be well for us to leave this place as soon as possible. I suggest that we leave tonight." Rogers said, "I beg your pardon, sir, but there's no boat on the island." "No boat at all?" "No, sir." "How do you communicate with the mainland?" "Fred Narracott, he comes over every morning, sir. He brings the bread and the milk and the post and takes the orders." Mr. Justice Wargrave said, "Then in my opinion it would be well if we all left tomorrow morning as soon as Narracott's boat arrives." There was a chorus of agreement with only one dissonant voice. It was Anthony Marston who disagreed with the majority. "A bit unsporting, what?" He's the young guy, remember? He said, "Ought to ferret out the mystery before we go. Whole thing's like a detective story, positively thrilling." Now, ferret, we know, is like a rodent, and we're not used to using it in this context, but based on how he says it in that sentence, you can make a pretty good guess what ferret's second meaning could be. The judge said acidly, "At this time of my life, I have no desire for thrills, as you call them." Anthony said with a grin, "The legal life's narrowing. I'm all for it. Here's to it." He picked up his drink and drank it off at a gulp. Too quickly, perhaps. He choked badly. His face contorted, turned purple. He gasped for breath, then slid down off his chair, the glass falling from his hand. And that's the end of chapter